Hello and welcome to Florida Basketball Hour. I am Neil Black, Saturday Down South. On this episode, we're going to break down Florida's semifinal crash out in Nashville at the SEC tournament. The Gators lose to Vanderbilt in that game in the SEC semis, 91-74, Florida's most lopsided loss of the season. Not in the last 2 years. There was the blowout loss at Tennessee. It seems like something about the state of Tennessee sometimes brings out the worst in the Florida Gators. On the flip side, it doesn't get much more. There's not much more contrast than getting blown out by Vandy and then, a day later getting back-to-back one seeds in the NCAA tournament for the first time in school history. Florida joins a pretty elite list of 10 programs that have accomplished back-to-back one seeds this century. They're everybody you'd think. Interestingly, Kentucky has not done that since 2003 and 2004. So it's been a while for even big blue blood Kentucky to go back-to-back with the one seeds. The Gators are the one seed in the South. There was about 3 to 4 hours of doubt as to whether Florida would get a one seed, and then Houston's late rally against Arizona fell short, and the UConn, before that happened, UConn lost to St. John's fairly convincingly in the Garden. What a weird series UConn St. John's was this year. Quite obviously. Excuse me. UConn obviously gets a really lopsided win against St. John's in Hartford, 72-40, one of the worst losses of Rick Pitino's career. And then literally 17 days later, St. John's nearly returns the favor, handing Danny Hurley his most lopsided loss since before the UConn national championship season. So, what a strange series. St. John's also won the other game, played in the Garden. So UConn actually goes 0-2 in the Garden against St. John's. And then naturally the committee says, hey, let's reward St. John's for how they played down the stretch of the season with a 5 seed. And by the way, let's go ahead and give Gonzaga a 3 and Michigan State a 3. But let's give Vanderbilt a 5. Like, some of these seeding choices, and I'm sorry about the coughing, some of these seeding choices made almost no sense whatsoever. So, I think the committee did a right job, did the correct job with the field. I wouldn't have admitted or allowed anyone else into the field that the committee did not. I think they did a poor job seeding, especially with Braden Huff doubtful. I didn't understand why Gonzaga was a 3. I thought Vanderbilt, I don't understand how they could go from a 4 when the committee seeds were released to a 5 when all they did was add quality wins to their resume in that span without a bad loss. None of that made sense. And then Michigan State obviously didn't play their best basketball down the stretch. So for them to actually go from I think they were a 4 and then they went to a 3, even though, they lost to Michigan and lost to UCLA in the Big Ten tournament, to come in with 2 straight losses. That was curious, and I know that they had a win over Purdue after the committee made the seedings, but every other win was quad 2. And, so I didn't understand what the committee was doing there either. Those are kind of my qualms with the committee. But the Gators didn't leave it in their own hands, and they got bailed out, really, by Arizona. Karchikov hit a couple bank triples. Braden Burries The bank was open for him on a late drive. He's a great player. That was a good shot. I just thought that he threw it up there really hard off the glass, and he got a bankroll. Anyway, Arizona made big baskets down the stretch and held off Houston. Now, I think if Houston had gotten the one, all it changes for Florida is their path and potential Sweet 16 opponent, because Florida would have been a 2 in the same region. Florida was going to the South pretty much no matter what. It was just a matter of what seed line the Gators ultimately earned, and they earned the fourth 1 seed in school history for the Gators. First time they've done it back-to-back. All the other 1 seed teams made the Final Four. 2 of them won the national championship. The one that didn't lost to UConn in Dallas at the Final Four. So the history is pretty good for Florida. They've done pretty well in the rare instances in special seasons when they earn a 1 seed, and that's kind of the overarching thought, is what a special season for Florida. Just the fact that they were able to get a 1 seed after replacing what I think is the best backcourt in the history of the SEC, and replacing all 4 pieces, including Denzel Aberdeen, who transferred to Kentucky, and then flipping the roster around where the complementary piece to last year's national champion becomes the linchpin of this year's 1 seed. An incredible job in roster construction by Todd Golden, Jonathan Sapphire as the de facto general manager. Carlin Hartman had a hand in roster building more so this year than any other, and I think they did an incredible job putting together a team that could compete and then get a 1 seed, and then for Florida to do it after the 5-4 start and to finish 21-3 in their final 24 games, ranked 2nd in Bar Torvik since February 2nd, ranked 4th in Bar Torvik since January 1st. To do all of those things when they had fallen out of the AP Top 25 at 5-4, I think pretty exceptional stuff. I think they fell out of the AP Top 25 after 5-4. I think they lost to Missouri and then fell out. Nonetheless, to fall out of the top 25 and then come all the way back and get a 1 seed, be one of only 4 teams in America with 10 or more quadrant 1 wins, just extraordinarily special stuff. And Florida's program is in an incredibly lofty place right now. The Gators are, Corey Knowles told me on Stadium Gale, Gators are the big boys right now. And we saw that at the SEC tournament when Florida capped a 3-0 season against Kentucky. Obviously, the Gators, I suppose, could play Kentucky in the NCAA tournament. I didn't look to see when that matchup could occur. Yeah, so Florida could meet Kentucky in the national final. If Kentucky made a run to the national championship game, they would earn a 4th shot at the Gators. Shades of 2014 in that regard. Anyway, so unlikely that Kentucky gets that far. Florida goes 3-0 against the Cats. They played 120 minutes of basketball this year, the Gators and the Bluest of Blue Bloods. And Florida led for 117 minutes and 48 seconds. There were 2 minutes and 12 seconds of game time where it was tied, and Kentucky led for 0 minutes and 0 seconds. So, the Gators are the big boys. And by the way, should we break it down again for everybody in the back? All right. Since 2000, we will because it's fun. Final Fours, Florida 5, Kentucky 4. Elite Eights, 9-9. National title game appearances, Florida 4, Kentucky 2. National championships 1, Florida 3, Kentucky 1. NCAA tournament win percentages, Florida 74%, Kentucky 69%. And then NCAA tournament wins, Kentucky 48, Florida 45, which if Florida makes a run to the Final Four this year, Kentucky loses to Santa Clara, Florida would overtake them in actual tournament wins as well. But, even if they don't, Florida has the win percentage advantage. They have the Final Four advantage. They are tied in Elite Eights. Florida has the national title advantage. Florida is the bluest of blue bloods. They're the most successful program in the SEC since 2000. Those are the facts. You can debate, or as the great Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan said, you're entitled to your own opinions. You're not entitled to your own facts. And I think Kentucky fans were in their feelings a lot about what the facts are. They were in their feelings about the refs, who clearly were the reason that Kentucky never led for 1 second in 120 minutes of basketball against Florida. They were in their feelings about spending $22 million and having a team that's a 7 seed with a 20-12 record. Sorry, 21-13 record. They're in their feelings about whether or not they're going to have to fire a guy who's a beloved alum of their program, which is never easy. They're in their feelings about how they say injuries derailed their season, even though like Jalen Lowe's a ball dominant point guard who never impacted winning anywhere he had been. And Jaden Quaintance had a torn ACL when they elected to pay him a lot of money. And they knew it was unlikely he would return this year. And lots of people said that they wouldn't, that he was unlikely to play, and they signed him for $1 gazillion anyway. That's strange. And, you know, they're in their feelings because Cam Williams, a defensive specialist who was a first team on mid-major player and is very good, was out for a while and actually forced Mark Pope to think about his rotations and decide on who to play better. And obviously a big problem with Mark Pope this season was his rotations were weird, right? They played Jesper Johnson when most people watch that guy and were like, that dude's unplayable, right? They kept playing him because, you know, God forbid Mark Pope doesn't play a highly touted freshman that he recruits. And like, there's a huge distinction, right? Like that's so fascinating to me. I mean, there are a lot of, I think, distinctions between Mark Pope and Todd Golden. You know, and I'm not knocking Mark Pope, who I think is an excellent coach. I really do. And I know Kentucky fans probably will disagree with me, but I think they run really terrific offense. You know, I think if they stick with him, there's going to be a pathway to long-term winning there because they have more resources than the Roman Catholic Church, right? But Jasper Johnson's a top 25 player. He's the highest recruit that Pope signed, unless you count Quaintance, who obviously committed to Arizona State first and then boomeranged back to Kentucky once he had proof of concept from Pope with the Sweet 16 in year one. And like Pope couldn't sit his top 25 recruit. Like he was too proud and kept forcing him into the rotation when it was clear that like he was hurting the basketball team and that like Texas A&M starts a 40-10 run because Jasper Johnson's on the floor for a little bit. Todd Golden has 2 top 50 recruits, CJ Ingram and Alex Lloyd, and like he doesn't force them to play, you know, and there were stories coming out in Lexington about Jasper Johnson's confidence and like his long-term future. And, you know, when you put kids in bad positions, those sorts of outcomes happen. Whereas if you don't demand these types of things from young players, like the long-term progression for Alex Lloyd and CJ Ingram continues to be good. And you saw CJ Ingram was ready when he went in the Mid-State game, right? But Florida doesn't force that upon kids. They give them a plan and they develop people. And so it's not just roster construction that makes Golden elite. It's not just, you know, the ability to manage the salary cap and NIL that John Sapphire makes. It's elite. It's culture. It's imparting belief into players, and it's the development. And you saw all these things. That's how you get 2 straight 1 seeds. Florida's the big boy on the block, and Kentucky is part B. This is the reality. They're entitled to their own facts. They've got a bunch of banners from when only white people were allowed to play that they brag about all the time. The facts are if Florida won the national title this year, it would be their 4th national title since integration. That would tie Kentucky since integration. Kentucky likes to point out that the titles are actually equal. If you go back to 1996, that's true. And that's fine. Like, let's go back to 1994 instead then and make it the last 32 years. And then the Final Fours are equal. So it's not just since 2000. Like, if you want to play that game, cool. We'll go back 2 more years, and then the Final Fours are equal, 6-6. So the reality is, since the expansion of the field to 68, Florida's the 2nd winningest program in the SEC. They're the second winningest program in the SEC in regular season wins since 2000. They have as many Final Fours as Kentucky in the last 32 years, and they have as many natties as Kentucky in the last. Like, it doesn't change the analysis that much. Florida's a big boy. They like to say that Florida's a flash in the pan and a fluke, and the results say that's not true. 3-0, 120 minutes, 0 minutes for Kentucky with the lead. That alone made Nashville gratifying. It would have been better if Florida won. They wanted to win the tournament. I promise you that. I don't buy any of the good loss rhetoric. I think all that is silly. Quite honestly, like, no coach that's good says we need a loss, right? Billy Donovan used to laugh that off too. Todd Golden did say, like, hey, I think it'll recenter us, which I think that's kind of a fair way to put it. He was asked about that yesterday at media, and I thought, like, his answer was pretty reasonable. He's like, look, no, we did not want to lose a game. Like, let's not be preposterous here. But he also said, like, you know, it happened. So, you know, we're going to learn from it and we're going to use it to our advantage. But he said, I'm never going to be like, oh man, I'm glad we lost. And yeah, in fact, his quote, I prefer it the other way. It'd be more of a challenge if we wanted to win the national championship, if we had won 20 in a row. Yeah. But I do think when you lose, you can really drill down on some areas you need to improve. When you're winning, that's more difficult. It's more difficult to teach. It's more difficult to hold people accountable. But, you know, we never want to lose games. And that's where, you know, I do think Florida can recenter. Like, they didn't play particularly well for 40 in any of the last four. Miss State, they had the slow start. At Rupp, they had the bad finish. Against Kentucky, they had the rough finish. Nashville quarterfinal. And then Vanderbilt, they got worked for 40. I'm not going to get into the refs. They sucked. Like, Pat Adams, Doug Shows, they did a bad job. KB Burnett was fine, but that's a tough career for him. Anyway, that wasn't why Florida got shellacked. Like, the rest were terrible. I mentioned on our Patreon, patreon.com/FloridaBB Subscribe if you aren't already. That's the best way to support the podcast. I get asked that all the time. What's the best way to support you and Eric? It's to subscribe to Florida Basketball Hour on Patreon. The money that we have that, like, pays for our streaming service that we use to deliver the podcast all comes from the Patreon. Like, you know, our sponsorship, quote unquote, is very minimal for the actual podcast. And in order to continue doing the podcast, Fawcett and I had to start a Patreon. So the best way to support us is to do the Patreon. But Florida, you know, they just got worked, man. I thought they got out-coached a little bit, and I thought Florida staff lost its composure a little bit, which doesn't usually happen. I thought there was the early pull-down on Condon that should have been a technical, and it should have been, and the replay showed the wrong play. Like, it was very clear that Condon got pulled down. It actually looked like Okereke tried to step on him. Maybe he didn't, but it was, nonetheless, it was technical worthy. Should have been free throws for Florida, and the ball, it's not called. Vanderbilt makes a three, I think, on the ensuing possession, and Florida staff was losing their mind, and that led to the 11-0 Vanderbilt kill shot. So a game that was really close got to 23-14 Vanderbilt just like that, and when the Gators were down 9, and really Vanderbilt never looked back from there. In fact, Florida only got within 10 once in the second half. You know, but so I thought Florida staff lost its composure a little bit because of the refs, and then turnovers kind of did the rest. And Vanderbilt scored 20 points off 9 Florida turnovers in the first half. That's about 2.5 a possession off the turnover, and the 9th turnover came at the end of the half, so Vanderbilt couldn't score off of it. So really, it was 20 off 8, which is 2.5 possession. That's about as great a return as you're ever going to get on turnovers. And so, like, when you get outscored 20-4 on turnovers in one half, which is what happened in the semis, and you're down 15 at halftime, what's that say? Well, it says that the lead is because of points off turnovers. And if both teams had 0 points off turnovers, Florida would have been up by 1. So Florida's half-court defense was fine in the first half. And that's the case even though Vanderbilt bucked the scout, right? Now, I thought Vanderbilt outcoached Florida because they were ready defensively for Florida's offense more in the second meeting, whereas the Gators didn't seem to adjust necessarily what Vanderbilt did. Maybe because they won, maybe because the analytics just keep saying Vanderbilt's bigs aren't going to hit shots, whereas Vanderbilt trapped Florida's ball screens pretty consistently and blitzed their dribble handoffs. Like Florida had 3 turnovers on dribble handoffs plays. Like that is not okay. That is a lapse of concentration type turnover. That's a bad angled screen. Those are simple mistakes that are on Florida. And Todd said that when I asked him about it yesterday, as I record here on Wednesday. But like, that's also a good scout from Vanderbilt. Like those strategies worked better. And you know, that made all the difference, to be quite honest. Vanderbilt shoots 10 of 21 from 3. Obviously, when they do that, they're tough to beat. Florida's staff is right that, like, the fact that Tyler Nickel, Tyler Tanner, and Duke Miles went 3 of 11 or 3 of 10 from 3 suggests Florida did do a good job with that part of the scout, right? Like anytime you hold those 3 guys to 3 of 10, you probably feel pretty good about your chances to win. But, you know, A.K. Okereke, season best 3 of 5 from deep. Devin McLaughlin, season best 3 of 4 from deep. Jalen Washington, he makes a 3. And according to shot quality, all but one of the Vanderbilt bigs 3s were uncontested. And Vanderbilt went 7 of 9 on the uncontested 3s. They went 1 of 8 on uncontested 3s in the SEC tournament final. Their bigs did. So the script flipped entirely a day later, but when you buck the scout like that and you get 24 points off turnovers, it becomes very hard to win. The turnovers are the biggest concern coming out of Nashville. It's not really close. Florida committed 33. They had a 22% turnover percentage against Vandy. And Florida committed 19 nasty, gnarly turnovers against Kentucky. That's a 25% turnover percentage. Florida's total turnover percentage in Nashville was 11 billion. No, it wasn't 11 billion, but it was bad. And it ends up being 24%. If you stretched out a 24% turnover percentage over the course of one season, you would end up with the worst turnover percentage in the entire country. That's not great, Bob. Let's be quite honest. If Florida turns it over 24% of the time this weekend in Tampa, they will not have games in Houston because they won't advance. I'm convinced of that. And I think we need to kind of, if you're a Florida fan, just prepare yourself for the possibility that if they turn the ball over a ton on Sunday, the season's over. That's how real stuff gets. And you all remember this from last year when UConn very nearly ended Florida's season in the second round anyway, right? If you play a team that is pretty good at taking care of the ball, or that takes care of the ball on that day, you better do what you do well. And luckily, Florida kind of snapped out of it. Now, should Florida beat an Iowa? Yeah. But if Florida plays Iowa, who has Clemson, Iowa has a couple things that kind of are working for Florida against Florida. They have Bennett Sturts. He's probably a top 5 point guard in America. And then they have bigs who could shoot it a little bit. I don't think Vanderbilt is really the right comp for them analytically. I didn't deep dive into Torvik on like who their actual comp is. I'm going to do that now. Let me see if I can pull that up. Okay, so I was 26 in Torvik. That's the best 9 seed. They went 10-10 in the Big Ten. Their efficiency against good opponents is just under 50, 46 offense, 46 defense, pretty steady like on both ends. They don't turn the ball over. 75% or 15.2 is their turnover percentage. That's pretty good. They turn you over 21% of the time, so they're active in that regard. At like what they do. But from a similar profile standpoint, we're going to look at like somebody that made a nice run. You would say like Butler 08. Those are the kinds of teams that, they look like similar resumes. Nobody with a similar resume to them has ever gotten past the second round, according to Torvik. But, I guess there's a first time for everything. Like, I think it's very possible for them to beat Florida. But I guess what I would say is, like, when you look at them versus the top 50, right? I'm populating the Iowa player stats versus top 50 opposition. Like, I think what Iowa does that they do pretty well, I guess, is they don't commit turnovers and they have bigs that can shoot it a little bit. And, they rebounded on the defensive glass. Well, Florida's a great offensive rebounding team, but Iowa can defensive rebound. So Florida would have to win that battle pretty efficiently. Tavion Banks, not like a killer, but he shoots about 50% from 3, right? Alvaro Figueroa, certainly smaller, not particularly athletic, not somebody that's going to like trouble Florida on the block, but a 33% three-point shooter. So like maybe this does kind of give you the Vandy vibes. It's interesting. I mean, Cooper Koch is another one, shoots 39% from outside. He's 6'8". Like, so they have bigs that can shoot it a little bit, and Florida has to be kind of honest with their scout there, I think, as they approach that game, if that's the game indeed that they get. I will say that, like, against quality opposition, those guys kind of cool off a little bit. Koch shoots 30% from 3 against top 50 teams. Fogueras, 26% from 3. Tavion Banks is the outlier. He shoots 59% from 3 against top 50 opponents. But, like, their offense is pretty much Sturts and Banks against really good teams. And then Cam Maniawu, if they can, like, get him on the block and he's kind of undersized and he has good footwork and scores that way. But the main thing they do is turn you over and then don't turn it over. And because they play at such a crawl, any turnover Florida has would be super magnified. A tricky game for the Gators if they get it. This was Todd Golden on the turnovers yesterday.
Obviously, the turnovers, kind of the loud thing from Nashville. Some of them kind of uncharacteristic, but that's sort of the focus. Safe to say.
Safe, very safe. I think some, but most, I believe, were on us. I thought we did a really poor job on the offensive end, and it's on me. Our guys, we played a little sped up. I thought we were playing hard. Not a concern in terms of our effort level. Like, we were elite on the glass all weekend. We got back 46% of our misses against Kentucky, and then 57% of our misses against Vanderbilt. Like, it wasn't a lack of effort thing, either on the glass or defensively. I think offensively, part of our effort and how hard and fast we were playing was part of our issue. We had some really bad transition turnovers. We had some screening issues and just some poor decision making. And I thought, again, like, we were just trying to play a little too fast. So hopefully this week we can kind of get back to how we had been playing over the past 2 months, where we were very comfortable and playing fast but not in a hurry. And a lot of those kind of uncharacteristic turnovers weren't showing up. But it's not a secret. That was definitely our biggest issue this weekend. The Vanderbilt game, for example, I think they had 20 points off our turnovers in the first half. And there's not a worse recipe for success against Vanderbilt than doing that.
Yep.
And so we'll address it. And I feel confident that we'll get it right for this week.
You were adamant that you didn't want to.
The Mark Long asked about the loss. I already read those quotes, but I think like you get the idea. Florida just kind of, has to not do that. They have to not. They've got to get back to that 9, 10, even if it's a higher possession game, 12 is fine. But like Iowa, you would want 10 or lower to feel really good about where you're at. And then your talent kind of takes over. And I think that's where Florida is certainly better, but, look out, obviously, because that game would be tricky. Clemson's interesting because I think they're going to have to play small now. And, we did see Vanderbilt trouble Florida with smaller lineups, but I just don't think that Vanderbilt could score on Florida. Like Vanderbilt's a top 10 offense. Clemson's a top 100 offense. There's a huge difference. So keep those tips in mind as you fill out your bracket. And if you're filling out a bracket this year, are you trying to win something real? Because while most people are playing for bragging rights in the office or with their family, MyBookie is giving away $100,000 in their Madness bracket contest. $100,000, real cash, all up for grabs. They're also celebrating 100,000 followers on Instagram with another $10,000 in prizes. So go follow them on Instagram to be eligible for that. If you're going to be in a March Madness pool, be in it to win it. Head to mybookie.ag. Use the code NEIL500. You'll get your first bet covered up to $500. If it misses, activate the bet back bonus token and run it back. The Madness only comes once a year. Why not roll with our guys over at MyBookie? They've also created a link, which I'll throw up here in the chat, and you can go directly to this link and sign up for MyBookie that way. And if you sign up for MyBookie and enter NEIL500 again, you'll get that bet back bonus, which that's pretty cool. You can run back your bet. So the Gators, a 1 seed in the NCAA tournament. They got Prairie View A&M or the Lehigh winner. That game coming on Wednesday night, right? Those are two teams that are in the 280s in KenPom. And so they are actually the worst teams in the NCAA tournament field. And, I don't know. I don't know if I'd rather have one of them. They both kind of went on freakish runs to get in. Only one of them has really played pretty well against higher level competition. I guess Prairie View A&M had kind of a back and forth tilt with LSU for a while. But Prairie View does not run good offense. They can't shoot. They do rebound well. Their main claim is that they turn you over at a freakishly high rate, and they play an incredibly fast-paced version of basketball. That's how they won their last 7 games, playing games where they either turned people over a ton or where they got out and scored a bunch of points in transition. And I think that would be their plan against Florida, would be just try to use their size and length to bother the Gators and turn Florida over. Lehigh is the opposite. They're almost that stereotypical mid-major team. Think the movie Hoosiers, where they slow things down, play methodically, and make a ton of shots. Their possession length average is 241st in the country. That is pretty slow. They're actually not as slow as most Lehigh teams have been in the past. They have decent positional size, but they're that classic team with okay positional size, but no real depth height. Like Hank Alvey can bang. He's 6'9", 250. Would have been the type of big to really trouble Tyrese Samuel and that Florida front court. Micah Hanlockton has struggled with smaller lower center of gravity bigs. in the past. Condon and Chinulu just don't. Edouard Bonnet is 6'8". They play a guy named Alfredo Adesa, who I don't know why I just made Cuban, but he's 6'10", 230, like another big body. But mainly what this team is they've got a guy named Nasir Whitlock who's just sensational. He's going to get a lot of money in the portal and transfer somewhere. He gets to the free throw line a ton. He makes his free throws. He shoots 44% from three. He can beat you off the bounce. He can create his own shot. He's going to be a lot of fun. I bet he has 20 to 25 against Florida if that's who Florida plays. And yeah, I mean that'll be fun at least. Like Lehigh has a pulse; they'll fight back, and I think could be enjoyable. All right, wanted to get into Florida's region just a little bit, and then I think that's enough. Any preview of the region, I think, is best done with brought to you by our guys over at Game Time Sidekicks. Those guys are fantastic. You want to go over there and make sure you check them out. They are, a lot of fun. And yeah, anyway, Game Time Sidekicks. If you use Stadium 15, you'll get 15% off your order. If you order $60 or more, you will get a free koozie with your order. All of this pretty awesome, I think. And yeah, let's get into the South region a little bit as we kind of go down top to the bottom. The 8-9 game, obviously we've talked Clemson, Iowa. Vanderbilt McNeese is one of those games that I feel like people have really doubted Vanderbilt in my mind a little bit. And I don't know if I totally buy why they think that McNeese is a bad matchup for Vanderbilt. I just don't see it. Because here's the thing. And I'm not trying to, knock McNeese. I think it's a great story getting back after Will Wade leaves. But what I would say is that McNeese thrives off turning people over. And I'm not really certain that they're the type of team that Vanderbilt doesn't turn it over with Miles and Tanner. So I just don't think that that's a super favorable matchup for an upset. So I like Vanderbilt there. Nebraska and Troy. I do actually think this is a more interesting and intriguing type upset. Troy, their strength is not necessarily protecting the ball, but they're a great offensive rebounding team, and they really limit the three-point shot. And so, I think there's a scenario where that's really a big deal because Nebraska shoots a ton of threes. Over 50% of their shots come from beyond the arc. Can they hit them against a tough Troy defense? Nebraska also does force a lot of turnovers, and they don't commit turnovers. But Nebraska doesn't rebound particularly well. They don't crash the offensive glass at all. A lot of it is about Fred Hoiberg's kind of we want floor balance at all times strategy. And, I think against Troy, Nebraska certainly won't be much bigger, and they'll be challenged a little bit on the glass. Both those teams play pretty much 5 or 6. It's not like Nebraska overwhelms you with depth. They play 7 guys. That's it. And it's really about 6. That's a tricky one. But if Nebraska gets by Troy, I think what's fascinating is all the reasons that Nebraska matches up tough with Troy are reasons that they're a bad matchup for Vanderbilt. They're 7th in the country in 3-point defense. They don't turn the ball over. They force a lot of turnovers. They're precisely the type of team that has given issues to Vanderbilt all year. And it wouldn't stun me if that occurred again in games that, are being played in Oklahoma City, where Nebraska will have a pretty sizable contingent of fans supporting them as well. So, I think when you look at like that area, like there are a lot of Florida fans that I think are what's the word? Disappointed, maybe, with having Vanderbilt in their bracket. But there's a chance that Vanderbilt does not survive and even get to Houston. Now Florida has 2-2, of course, but that's what we're talking about. Okay. Some other like thoughts on that region. VCU, always a sexy Cinderella because of that deep Final Four run, but they got a good matchup. Anytime you play somebody without their best player, it's really good. VCU is also one of the hottest teams in the country right now. I think that is a safe upset. Breaks my heart to say, but I think that's a safe one. My favorite round one matchup is actually the 3-14 game, Illinois and Penn. Penn just shocked everybody by winning the Ivy League. They're coached by Fran McCaffrey, one of the great college basketball coaches ever. He had really struggled in the NCAA tournament in his tenure at Iowa so much that it got him fired. But the Quakers have a guy named TJ Power, who, of course, initially committed to Duke, was a 5-star recruit, then transferred to Virginia and didn't play much, and is now at Penn and playing the way that he was projected to play as a 5-star recruit. At 44 points, went 7 of 14 from 3 in the Ivy League tournament. He can really play. Keaton Wagler is much CTV. Like, in my mind, that 3-14 game is going to be super fun. I really think. And, I'm interested I'm super interested in where, that game ends up. Like, because I could see in a scenario where that's a super close basketball game. And, I don't want to knock the possibility that there's a colossal upset in round one. Now, look, the Giant Killer model does have McNeese as a big time upset, kind of candidate. But again, I don't think I think matchup wise, the computers are getting tricked because Vanderbilt can neutralize what McNeese does best. Whereas I honestly think North Carolina's statistical profile, which reflects having Caleb Wilson a lot, is now gone. VCU has won 16 of its past 17. VCU shoots a high volume of threes. They out rebound teams. They can handle Carolina's size. I like that as a potential upset in that region. And then down at the bottom, my lock pick is St. Mary's over Texas A&M, so I'm sure to probably be wrong about that. I don't see a scenario, quite honestly, where St. Mary's doesn't beat A&M. A&M has not been playing well. St. Mary's can punish A&M inside. They're not going to be bothered by the press. They're too disciplined. They don't turn the basketball over. It's going to be a great St. Mary's Gales run to the second round where they will be promptly throttled by the Houston Cougars. And then, Houston and Idaho, kind of men against boys. You just overwhelming guard power from the Houston Cougars. They're different than they were last year where they kind of could, and that's a weakness, right? Their inability to kind of throw the ball inside to Jawan Roberts and have him be the sort of pressure release when their guards aren't making shots. But when you have Miles Uzan and Kingston Flemings and Emmanuel Sharp, you just guard after guard after guard. You're pretty hard to upset by some of these mid-major teams that usually rely on electric guards to pull upsets. Electric guards like Jack Golke making crazy shots for 40 minutes. So that's my kind of glance at the South Regional. You have gut brackets over at patreon.com/FloridaBB Hour. Make sure you go over there and subscribe. Hope you guys enjoyed. We'll be back with a full pod after game one. Go Gators. Keep attacking closeouts.